Hi, everybody. Parker J. Cole is here. I am the host of The Right Stuff, the queen of Tuesday nights. And now we're going to Thursday nights with Right Stuff Video Podcast. I hope you subscribe to our YouTube channel every week to get great content from authors that you love. And to kick off our Right Stuff podcast show tonight, we have author G.S. Muse. He is the author of the short story Whisper. And Whisper takes place in a universe that you're going to want to know a lot more about because G.S. Muse is coming out with another book within this universe. But what he wanted to do is express the universe to you via a short story first. So that's what he wanted to do at first. And then he's going to bring you into his story later on this year, fall 2018 of this year, more about that. So I can't wait to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce my guest co-host and contributor today, G Muse. G, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, Parker. Thank you for having me.
I am so glad that you took time out of your schedule to be with me tonight. You know, this is our first time, or rather second time, doing our video podcast. So I'm really this is going to go. And I want people to get to know a little bit more about you first. So go ahead, tell us who you are in your own words.
Well, thank you. My name is Greg. I go by GS Muse for my pen name. My background is in biotechnology. So I graduated with a bachelor's in biotechnology and molecular bioscience. And my dream is to do research. I love doing creation apologetics. But ever since I was a young kid, I always had not just that scientific side, but a creative side also. And so imagining this world that I put this particular story in has been quite an adventure. I've been kind of building this world, kind of playing with it in my head since I was in probably about the third grade. But as I went, you know, the world matured, it developed, it took on a different tone to it. And then different ideas started to come into play, especially when I converted to Christianity at about age 16. What would you like to know about the world?
So before I do that, I want to still dig more into you before you get into the world part, because you have a science degree. You have, I think, 2 science degrees, I think you said. Yeah, with those science degrees, that affects your creativity. Now, how does having that logical, analytical mind help with your creativity?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when I first started writing my novel that I'm working on, Eden's Revenge, which takes place in the same universe as Whisper, I found myself basically breaking out into lab report when I was describing the lab scenes. And it had to have professional authors, you know, come and tell me, hey, you know, this isn't quite what you want to do. You're going to lose the reader's interest. And, you know, with some people, they want more detail, and that's definitely important. But then when I went and read my own stuff, I was getting bored. So I had to learn, okay, well, what is part of the story and what is not part of the story? What contributes to this world and adds to the flow, adds to the narrative, and which part of this is kind of, you know, interesting background that you don't necessarily have to have right on the first page. And so I think that the creative side and the analytical side have really clashed in the writing. But in other ways, they've started to blend together and start to help each other, like learning how to be succinct in my writing, learning how to have sentences that don't do too much work, and also have it where I'm making it where a sentence says what I want it to say.
Right. And, you know, for those of you who are watching, I have gone over Eden's Revenge with G Muse for a while because he reached out to me, like two years ago, something like that? I can't remember. It's been a while. But reached out to me, and we've been working back and forth on the story. It's been a very interesting insight to see him grow. And one of the things that we both kind of noticed was that we kind of have similar writing styles, which is kind of cool because he, you know, when he reached out to me, gosh, I can't remember when G reached out to me. We just really it's been a while, but we really clicked. And so that's why I'm really excited about Whisper, because Whisper is a wonderful narrative. It's a short story that's going to help you get into the world of Eden's Revenge, because it takes place like kind of in the middle of this world. but it gives you a little bit of background that you may not have known. And I think it's going to be very important for Eden's Revenge that's be coming out later on this year. And so with this world, you have a lot of things going on. There's a word we're going to use called transgenic, not to confuse with transgender, but transgenic. And I'm just making a joke. This is just a joke out the joke box. Don't get all offended. Okay, but
it's pointed out to me by others as well.
Yeah,
the short word was the short version of it was transgens.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got the term transgenics or transgens from the TV show Dark Angel. From way back in the day, it was Jessica Alba. And a lot of people didn't see that show, but it was basically Jessica Alba was a genetically engineered super soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And she's going around like, oh, I'm a bad girl, like I'm gonna kick your butt. And it was like, and watching it now, it's really corny,
mm-hmm.
but it really impacted me back in the day. And it gave me a lot of these ideas for having the secret genetics lab where you're having these enhanced human beings.
Right. And the thing about this story is that sci-fi and science kind of are becoming more and more reality. They're becoming more and more reality. And what we're seeing is people being augmented by machines. We're being augmented and our lives are going longer by machines. One thing that I found interesting, G, that as I think about is like, you think that because we are able to implant machines in us, like my granny, she had a pacemaker, and that pacemaker keeps her alive. And when it was shorting out, they gave her a new pacemaker and she's still alive. You see what I'm saying? So these things are happening. So some people think, oh, look at, we're evolving to a better species. I would actually think that we weren't, because we're becoming dependent on external apparatus to keep us alive. And so what do you think about that? In this whole talk about transhumanism, transgenic stuff, what do you think about that type of scenario as we get into Eden's Revenge, into this world of Whisper?
Well, that actually I agree with you, and that actually comes up quite a bit later on in the actual core novel, which is Eden's Revenge itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually kind of a funny thing about genetics. We're able to actually now use genetic engineering to help repair people who have broken DNA. So if there's something genetically wrong with them, we are starting to experiment with being able to heal them.
Mm-hmm.
One case that I heard about, I believe it was a little girl, had a type of blindness. And the type of blindness I think she had was where dead cells would build up in her eyes. So, that would make it where the light wasn't passing through properly.
Okay.
And the eye is supposed to be able to flush that out. And so they were able to fix the genetic error, and now she's able to see a little bit. She's not seeing 20/20 like a normal person.
I don't see 20/20, and I'm somewhat a normal person. So
I guess none of us here are normal, and you're not supposed to use the term normal when talking about medicine, I guess. So my mistake there. But so little girl was able to see a little bit now. But there were different setbacks. Like there was a kid who's been referred to as Bubble Boy who died because of complications with gene therapy. When you genetically engineer somebody who's an adult or kid, not an embryo, you can call it gene therapy because you're trying to heal them.
Okay.
As opposed to a more like eugenics approach where you might say, oh, well, we want to make it where this person can jump over a 20-foot building or whatever.
Right.
And all of this so far has been limited to cells that are within the body. So they're not going to affect sperm or egg cells. So they're not going to affect the next generation. That would be a later step down the road, but obviously there's a lot of ethical concerns there. And even scientists are very concerned because they look at the past, they look at what the Nazis did, they look at what the eugenicists did. And so because of that, there is kind of a reaction where they want to be very, very careful. And sometimes that's usually a very good thing, but sometimes we're being a little too careful, where a lot more people are dying who could benefit from treatments. But within the story, go ahead.
What I was going to say too, the thing about these type of issues is that you do have to look at the ethical background and the ethical consequences of some of these things that we can do. And that's why we should always be kind of prayerful when we're making these advancements in science and advancement in medical technologies. It's not saying they're not good. I mean, I'm glad my granny has a pacemaker. I really am glad she has a pacemaker because I love my grandma. Okay. I want her with me for as long as I possibly can have her. You know, we even have machines that we can attach for people who are completely paralyzed that can walk again. So we're not stubbing our nose at these things. But when you start to really affect the genetics of our body, that's when you really start to be careful, because there's a lot going on that we don't know. And the more we know, the less we know, actually, as we keep digging into this thing. And that's why these concepts are kind of important to talk about, because these are the background of Eden's Revenge and also the background of Whisper, which we're going to talk about a little bit later as we continue our discussion. So what were you going to finish saying, G, regarding that?
It is kind of interesting because it as you said, we have to tread hesitantly. You know, like we're walking on thin ice. We have to be very careful. We also have to be careful not to be too bold and not to be too hesitant at the same time. And it's something that, you know, bioethicists, doctors, scientists, even the ones who aren't Christians are being very, very careful with what they do. Like there's talk with using something called a gene drive, which is it's probably a little more detailed than what I get into here, but they could use a gene drive to wipe out an entire species of mosquito. Wow. They wanted to. And there's talk about using this in places like Africa where there's a lot of malaria. But then there's the concern of it jumping, this gene drive jumping from one species to another, and maybe wiping out a lot more mosquito species than we intended. Affecting the environment. So there's a lot of balancing act. There's a lot of unknowns. You know, I think of Oppenheimer when he talked about I am become death, the destroyer of world, quoting the Hindu scriptures. When they had built the nuclear weapons, at one point in Eden's Revenge, one of the main characters, if I include this section in the final draft, she actually says that quote as well. She looks at this genetic engineering technology that she's created, sees how it's affecting the entire world around her, and she ends up saying the same thing.
Yeah, and so these concepts are important because we're talking about science reality meeting with science fiction, but we also recognize that border is narrowing over time, and that's why we have to be concerned about it. That's why there's a whole field now of bioethics that you can probably get a lot of information from, because you have these nuances. Also, you have these nuances kind of making huge differences in how we react to these things. So that's why these concepts that we're talking about is essential to understanding what's going on in Whisper and what's also going on in Eden's Revenge. And so what we're going to talk about today is Whisper, but Whisper is I guess it's like a prequel or 0.5 of Eden's Revenge. Eden's Revenge is coming out in fall 2018. And so we're really excited about that. So I want to get into Whisper real quickly. So Whisper is a short story that takes place in this world. And it's a narrative of a king, of an empire. And this king, quite frankly, sees the fall of his empire in a very short amount of time. And what Muse does very effectively, what he does is send you into this world, and gives you a lot of information very quickly. And you have to understand that, because I remember when he first started Eden's Revenge, there was lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of information that you are wading through to get to the story. But as he's gotten better at this thing, and I'm proud to be one of the people who have helped him out in that, when you read Whisper, you're like, whoa, it's a lot of stuff going on. You're almost sad to see it end, because it's just like a whisper, like, whew, we're done, because it's a short story. But there's a lot of information in Whisper. So that's what we're going to talk about really quickly. And so we're going to go into some of the background of Whisper. But go ahead. I kind of gave it my thoughts on what Whisper is about, this narrative. Go ahead and tell us about what Whisper is in your own words, G.
Thank you. And I guess the only last thing I want to say, just so I don't forget it, with genetic engineering, one thing that people have to consider with a lot of the genetic technologies, and as Christians, we are concerned about, playing God with our DNA or innate might be concerned about overriding nature or overriding evolution.
Mm-hmm.
If they're a little bit more mystical in their views, or even if they're not, they might just be practically willing to say, "Hey, we're a little concerned about messing with DNA, which we don't entirely understand,
Mm-hmm.
and we may never fully understand."
Right.
But one thing that actually comes into play in this universe, not so much in Whisper, but later on in Eden's Revenge, is something that scientists have observed called genetic entropy.
Okay.
Now, what that means is that over time, our DNA is actually breaking down. Each human being who is born with about 100 new mutations per person per generation. And what that means is that those mutations, each one by themselves, is usually not so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But it basically will mean death by 1,000 paper cuts. And if the Lord weren't to come back and you just let the human race go like this,
Mm-hmm.
eventually we would just see genetic collapse. And
Okay.
that's actually why it's a problem with endangered species that have small
Populations.
small populations, because the effects just end up going even quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but back into this world, the background into Whisper itself. I think that was your question, right?
Yeah.
So back into the world of Whisper, Eden's Revenge takes place on Earth, and Whisper takes place on Mars in that same year. So Whisper takes place just before the events of Eden's Revenge, and I wanted to write this because I wanted to give people a little taste of this world, give a little promo, kind of give that teaser. And it sounds like it's having the right effect because you're not the first person to say, "Hey, I want to know more."
Mm-hmm.
And so this particular Mars, it's in the future. It was colonized mostly by nations from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I did that is in Eden's Revenge, so in the main story, I wanted to create this Christian utopia, this world superpower. And I figured, right now the West and Asia have had, some interesting superpowers come into play. I decided, so I was like, okay, what might the future look like? What are some places that maybe don't have a lot of power right now that might have power in the future? And so you have a Puerto Rican empire. So Puerto Rico is independent, and they have an empire. And I wanted Africa to have, a lot of this power as well, because this is a world where the United States has collapsed and some other nations have risen up. The United States is now referred to as the Central Territories.
Mm-hmm.
They're no longer united, but there is still, you'll find out later a little bit that there is a dream of having an America. So with Africa rising up, not only do you have this basically Christian utopia known as Ezra, you also have other countries as well, and their ideologies aren't always so benevolent.
Right.
And a lot of them ended up colonizing Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And after they colonized Mars, there was a war with Russia, with what's can be referred to as the Magog Empire at times. I'll switch back and forth. I'll talk about the Russian people, and I'll talk about the Magog Empire.
Mm-hmm.
I'll still refer to the region as Russia, but at some point there was a war, and slaves are brought from Russia to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have kind of this reversal of race relations.
Right.
But I didn't want it to be so one-to-one. I didn't want it to be, totally obvious where it's like, okay, we're taking slaves from the United States and taking them to Africa or something like that. I didn't want it to be so black and white, no pun intended.
Right.
And that was partly a thought experiment for me because, like, I believe in being very logical, and I try to put emotions aside when it comes to emotional issues. But I wanted to have that. I did want to kind of explore what would the emotions like that feel like. What if it was somebody who looked more like you, in my case being me, you being me, who was, being put under the yoke of somebody. And so with that dynamic, there's what inspired this particular story, moving past kind of the building of that world, is I was watching the Hunger Games, and I've read the books, and I was thinking of a scenario, and I said, well, what if you have this scene in the Hunger Games where you have President Snow, who's the evil dictator, and you have Katniss Everdeen, who's the hero. And she comes to his office, and he's he's somewhat friendly with her, but he hates her. He wishes he could kill her, but there's a political dynamic going on where he basically has all the power, and the only reason he just doesn't kill her on the spot is because it would make him unpopular.
Right.
So my thought was, what if you kind of had this reversal of power? What if it turned out that you had a Katniss Everdeen type character who it turns out she's the one with all the power, and she's really the cat and he's the mouse.
Right.
We've had totally a reversal of power.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the background in the story, and I don't think I'm ruining it for anybody if anybody's worried about that, because
no, you're not, because I read Whisper, and I've got Edith's Revenge, and most of the stuff is just things you're going to need, or that'd be just nice to have in the back of your head as you read both of them. There's so much information because there's a lot of world building, like it comes with speculative fiction anyway. There's a ton of world building, that you have to do because that makes the story more relatable. So no, I don't think anyone hearing this is going to have spoilers at all. You're just giving us your genesis of the idea.
Awesome. So basically, as you see this dynamic, there was a quote from the book that I would, I won't worry about trying to pull it up, but he says, hey, there were 10,000 rebels and slaves, thrown into the Martian jungles. There's these giant super domes that have jungles inside of them. And you end up finding out later that there's some pretty scary things in there.
Right.
And it wasn't, unlike the Hunger Games, it wasn't intended that anybody would survive.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did, the people thrown in there, not only were they killed, but a lot of the guards were killed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts talking about, there was a beast in the forest, how did you survive? And she's like, who are men that they should call other creatures beasts?
Right. Right.
So you end up finding out, like, I really struggle with her motive. I'm not sure how much I should talk about her motive right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I'm going to actually read an excerpt. And I actually particularly like this particular excerpt because the excerpt I'm going to read is not going to give you anything about the book, but it does kind of make you very intrigued. And so we're coming from the Mr. President. His name is Anthony. What's his name? Because I don't have it right in front of me.
Chaka.
Anthony Chaka.
I'm gonna kind of ruin my own magic. I literally went on and
Don't tell us. No.
Okay. There's President Chaka, which is a word in, I can't remember which African language, but it means king. So he's literally being called President King. Mm-hmm. And there's times where he's like, I'm the emperor, but he'll kind of be called Mr. President as almost a polite thing, even though everybody knows who he is.
Right. So I'm going to read a quick excerpt here, and this is from Whisper, a first glimpse at the world of Eden's Revenge. And this is available on Amazon.com for those of you listening in. The link will be in the description at the bottom.
Oh, and by the way, today, this is being aired live, right?
Yeah. No, it's not live. It's not live.
Okay. Yeah. The day when we air this, I will make it free for anybody who's watching. Go right on and get a copy of Whisper for free.
Oh yeah. And that's how a number of us got it, was through it being for free. And I think somewhat that sometimes having a free book, especially with the author you don't know, it does kind of give you a taste of their style. So I really suggest you get this when it's available for free. Go ahead and get a copy of this. I think you'll like it, and it reads very quickly. And I'm going to read just a quick excerpt. Are you transgenic weapons sent from our enemies, the Magog, or perhaps the Aryan Empire, or some other Eurasian degenerates that have spread across the solar system like a plague? My people are older than your empires. We watched you in your fertile crescent building your tower. We watched you as you scattered across the earth like cockroaches in a room with the light turned on. We watched as you shed the blood of your own, and we gloried in it. And we watched you scratch your way to the heavens, ever multiplying, never stopping your relentless pursuit to become gods, always reaching, always failing, like the grasshopper before a spider queen, unaware of your betters until it is too late. I could not pin down her voice. It floated in the air, bouncing from wall to ceiling. Is that what you are? I asked, demanding. Cockroaches hiding from the light, hiding from the ever-expanding might of the human empires. It is you hiding in this room, hiding from a weapon forged of light, Face me, cockroach. And that is an excerpt from Whisper, a first glimpse of the world of Eden's Revenge. Eden's Revenge will be out fall of 2018, as well as when this show airs, you can get this book for free. So make sure you get a copy of it. I think you're going to love it. And I actually like your wordsmith skills here. And I'll tell you why. I am always fascinated by monarchs, and I'm always fascinated by empires. That's just something I've always been fascinated by. And what I like that she says here, and it really reaches to humanity in and of itself. She says, you're always reaching to become gods. You know, you want to be the gods of everything. And she's always saying that. And that is very significant in Eden's Revenge about being gods. And so without giving anything away, tell us what's going on with this conversation that the president is having with this young girl.
Well, this is as it's kind of being revealed that she is a Vordaula, a race that's somewhere between vampires and dark elves. And the Vordaula have been hiding amongst humans for thousands of years. So, you know, human beings were walking around and we don't know. They're there and they'll live for thousands of years. And they will, you know, just kind of blend into society. But they're essentially like superhumans. Not superhumans as in like superheroes, but they're genetically superior. And there's a whole backstory to that you'll have to buy Eden's Revenge to find out about. But like I said, remember to the audience, Whisper is out now. You can get it now. But with him talking to her, he's wondering, is she some kind of bioweapon? He's wondering, is she, you know, was she sent there to kill him? He asks her at one point, you know, are you part slave? And you know, she said, no, you know, I'm not part slave. You know, my fathers have, you know, neither me nor my fathers nor my mothers have ever been a slave to anyone. And the reason he asks her this is a society where they value being very dark. Sorry, the thing froze for a second.
Oh, I can still see you. You're fine.
All right, this is a society where they value being very dark. At one point, he describes his guards as having skin like a raven's feathers. And part of the reason I did that is because I've heard about in African American culture with light-skinned women being considered more desirable than dark-skinned women. When I heard about that in high school the first time, I thought that was so sad. That's part of the reason why Mariana in you know, sorry, I'm jumping between books again a little bit.
Okay.
Over in Eden's Revenge, one of the heroes is a dark-skinned black female. And that's part of the reason why somebody introduced me to you. Help me with that character. And so with in this society on Mars, you know, this is what's valued, and he sees that she has lighter skin, he sees that she has green eyes, and so this is why she answers no. And the reason he thinks she's slaves is when he's talking about Eurasians, not just talking about Russians. This is a society where the form of racism that exists, it encompasses everything from the Eurasian continent is viewed as being Eurasian. So the sins of the British Empire or the sins of Japan is all lumped in as if this is all one giant people. And part of where I got that from, like, I hope I'm not being too political on your show.
Oh, you're fine. One thing, I don't know, let our viewers know, one thing we do is try to keep it real. We want your opinions, and we want, you know, the right authors, they have opinions, and so it's okay to express them. We'll never be it'll never be a problem to have them. So go ahead and talk. If people can't respect your opinion, I can't do anything about that.
So. I appreciate that. Well, part of the reason where I got that from, this idea of, you know, there's the us and them, there's the Africans and the Eurasians, is because I was watching this talk, and I won't say, you know, where it was, I won't say who it was, because I've talked about it quite a bit, but I saw a Christian organization, and they were talking about how white people need to apologize to black people for, you know, all the bad things that happened way back in the day. And I was like, you know, my ancestors fought to end slavery. You know, I had ancestors who died in the Civil War, and I don't think that gives me any merit. Just like I don't think if I have ancestors who do bad things, that makes me have guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And I figure everybody, if you look at the cultures of the world, China had a pretty bad slave trade. Japan did some pretty bad things. You know, Arabia, there's a lot of bad things that happen. But that doesn't mean that I go blame that Arab or, you know, that Chinese person, you know, because they weren't even born yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had nothing to do with it. And
Right.
so my thought was, if we are mad at what happened, you know, in the British Empire, who were actually the first people to try to abolish slavery, but if we're going to blame, you know, white people for the sins of the British Empire, including people who are of German descent, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is, you know, a good chunk of what I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like a mix of just about everything in Europe and a few other places too. There's some rumors. We don't know for sure how much those rumors are true, because we need to get historical records and DNA tests and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wait a minute, if we're going to blame people of German descent and want them to apologize for what happened in the British Empire or what was done by Anglo-Saxons, you know, if we're going to do a group guilt thing here,
Mm-hmm.
that makes about as much sense as blaming like a Chinese person for what Japan did in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because, you know, you have an island off the mainland and then you have, you know, a country within the mainland.
Right.
You know, they're almost mirror images in kind of a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, what if you extend this logic further? You know, just because somebody's from the same continent as somebody else that did something bad means they have guilt. What if we consider all of Eurasia to be one continent? And so, like, I'm somebody that I think we need to look at the individual, and there is a sense in which we all have inherited Adam's sin, and I don't entirely know how all that works out, but at the same time, like, I think that we got to look at people as an individual. You know, if somebody did something bad to me, it doesn't matter if they're black or white or green.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look at them as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of where that came from.
And that's a good point to make, because, you know, I honestly am one of those people who know that there's not an ethnic group on the planet that hasn't done something to somebody else. You know, there's not one that exists, you know, even if maybe you didn't do it to another ethnic group, maybe you did to your own ethnic group. I mean, we can't, you know, we're all holding banners saying this happened, we all are guilty of something. And I think at the end of the day, if you start to see people as individuals, that kind of helps with some of the rhetoric that's going on right now. If you see people as individuals, you don't start to lump everybody together. You work with that one person. Now, we all know, and I've said this on my show many times, we all know that various ethnic groups have quote unquote characteristics. You know what I mean? Like, I can't think of anything right now, but, you know, if I were going to be funny, I would say, you know, and this is me being funny, you know, black people and chicken, you know, the whole thing is black people eat a lot of chicken. I mean, it's just a stereotype. It's just, you know, good fun, you know, or whatever. But there are characteristics for different ethnic groups because of the culture that's involved, and we understand that. But once you start to see people as individuals and relate to those people as individuals, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening right now will be a little bit better. I think racial tensions will be a little bit different because you start to see people as paint strokes. You know, like, this is my paint here, and, you know, G, you have paint there right now. It's a little flush with the yellow light. You know, this is all paint, but, you know, we're multifaceted, and we're diamonds, and we understand that there's more to me than me just being an African American woman. There's more to me than just that. My full identity is not I'm an African American woman. My full identity is who I am in Christ, and Christ made me multifaceted. I have many different things I can do for the kingdom, and that goes for everybody. And that's why you have to find your identity in Christ. You know your identity in Christ, then you're not limited by the physical here. You're not limited by that. It makes up who you are because he did create you, and he created you uniquely. That's fine. But then once you start to see individuals, to me, that makes a lot of things better. Mind you, you are always going to have people who are going to lump other people together. You're going to have it. That's just the way it is. You know, the Bible says, as much as we can, live peace with all men. You know what I mean? As much as we can. You know, there are some people you will never get along with. So we just got to accept that. So, well, you know what?
That's actually the one thing that I think has helped me the most, especially in recent years, when I think about you know, quote unquote race relations. Like I had an issue a while back where I was like, you know, I had a guy, you know, ask me for money, you know, I'm starving, I'm in Africa, and I wanted to give it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually took a black woman at a bank, you know, tell me, no, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have accepted it from another white person. Then when I told you about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, you know, this.
I had the same thought, by the way. I was like, dude.
You said to me, this is what one of the most, this incredibly wise person I know named Parker J. Cole told me. You gotta see past the paint.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you know what? That's important. I was thinking about that today, where I'm like, if I'm gonna go buy a car, what color the car is, that's what's the least important.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with people. What color they are, that's what's least important. And I think that's something that has meant a lot to me, because, you know, then I'm able to say, hey, you know, I'm an individual, that other person's an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it is kind of interesting that I think that people are there's, it seems like there is a movement of us, you know, people like you and me, who are starting to say, hey, I want to see other people as people, and that's how I want to see them.
And it's a long process, because America has a very complicated racial DNA. We do have a very complicated racial DNA. And I was actually going in a Facebook chat with some people. We were all talking about romance, because, you know, I write romance, I predominantly write romance, and they were talking about people of color being more on the covers of books, and publishers pushing people of color, which I'm all for, you know. But one lady made a very interesting point. She said the thing is that our culture, particularly in the U.S., is so complicated. Race relations in general are very complicated because of the history, and it's just a complicated thing. So that's why it takes each individual to make that personal decision of what they're going to do. And I think once we get to that point, we may not have as many problems that we have. I don't know. Maybe I'm a hopeless optimistic. But then I also think too that if it wasn't race relations, if it wasn't the color, it's going to be something else. You know, you don't come from this much money, or it's going to be something else. I think we'll always have something that is going to be used to be divisive. I totally think that. But, you know, we're getting close to the end of our show here today, and I've been having a good time talking with G. We kind of went off topic, but that's kind of like what I want to do with the podcast, is make sure you get the picture behind the author. Some of the things are, you know, because I think authors tell wonderful stories. We all tell wonderful stories, and we want to know why we tell those stories. So Whisper is available on Amazon.com. I want to show you a quick picture of it so you can get it. I got it on my Kindle here, so you can get a picture of it. And I should have had this ready. So you get a picture, so you can see it. Cover, there it is. So that's the cover of it here. You see all the window. There you go. There's the cover of it. And
looks like Rihanna. That is, I gotta tell your audience, that is one woman's. Put it back up again.
Oh yeah.
That is one woman's eyes on a different woman's face. I used GIMP, which is a free version of Photoshop, you know, to make that. And I've had professional people look at that and say, "Greg, you did an amazing job." So anything else I should say about the story at the moment?
No, I think we've really titillated people, especially some of the background. Let's put that down. Some of the background that we've done with the story. I think we really titillated our viewers. So I hope you enjoy Whisper. It's going to be, the link is going to be available in the show description. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, because we're going to be talking to authors from various walks of life, because Right Stuff showcases Christian authors worldwide. That's what we do. I've been doing it 5 years via my podcast on Blog Talk Radio. And then I want to also branch out to YouTube. So I hope you would join me for the ride as we give you great authors to talk to and to engage with, and just learn what's the story behind the story. Who's this person behind the idea? And so, G, let people know where they can find you online. And that also will be available in the show description as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, my main website is greenslug.com, but slug is spelled with 2 G's. I also have my Amazon site where I'm on there as GS Muse. So that's G.S. And space MUSE. And then I also have a YouTube channel, which is called Green Slug. Again, slug is spelled with 2 G's. And I think that's where I get my most traction. And I guess the last one I'll plug is my Medium account, where I'm on there as a GS Muse again. And with that one, I talk a little bit more about society. I talk about politics. And I have a story on there that's a fan fiction about for Star Trek Voyager, where where I get into a lot of Christian themes. I get into a lot of what ifs, and it takes place some 20 years after the show ends.
Yeah.
It says, what if the world were a little different? What if war broke out and everybody starts questioning what they've always believed? So you'll have like the Ferengi questioning their philosophy. You've got the Vulcans questioning their philosophy of logic. You've got the Klingons who are still warlike, but they end up having different values behind. Instead of being all about honor, now they're more about what is justice.
Right.
And humans, instead of being secular humanists, they've had a Christian revival, and so you're seeing a lot more people wearing crosses and things like that, and a lot of uncertainty about the way the world is, especially as the Borg are encroaching. Anyway, let me not ruin too much more.
Yeah, and so for our viewers out there who may be new to Parker J, I'm a fanatic with Star Trek. FYI. Okay, that's kind of like how you would need to know. I have not watched Discovery because I'm nervous of watching Discovery, because my pet peeve is, why keep going backwards? There are so many stories to keep going forward. Why do we keep going backwards? And so that's one of my pet peeves. But that's me and G. We'll talk about that We'll talk about that because we're both fans of the show. And so, G Muse, thank you so much for being with us on the show today to let us highlight Whisper. And Whisper is available on Amazon.com. The link will be in the show description box below. Make sure you hit subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll be talking to more Christian authors worldwide. I am the queen of Tuesday and Thursday nights, Parker J. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day.